그래서 너무 다양한 소리가 나오는 게 너무 신기했고, 일단 해금이 되게 사람의 목소리랑 좀 비슷하다고 많이들 하세요. 줄을 눌러서 이렇게 음을 계속 왔다 갔다 진동하는 그런 형태를 띠고 있다 보니까 애절하다라고 많이 말씀을 해주시는 것 같아요. 이 곡은 제가 좀 오래 좋아했던 친구에 대한 제 여러 감정을 담은 곡인데요. 슬펐던 마음, 혹은 뭐 고마웠던 마음, 이런 여러 가지 감정들을 한데 묶어서 마음이 담긴 곡이라고 할 수 있습니다. 현대적인 음악으로 이제 재구성하는 단계를 거칠 때 항상 중요하게 생각하는 거는 음악의 분위기를 해치지 않는 선에서는 뭔가 전통적인 주법들, 식임새, 이런 전통의 냄새라고 할까요? 맛? 이런 걸 살릴 수 있는 요소들을 좀 집어넣으려고 하는 편이에요. 저는 요새 연주하면서도 스스로가 마음도 편하고 몸도 편안한 음악들을 좀 자주 들려드리고 싶다. 제가 음악으로 위로받았던 것처럼 제가 하는 음악들로 여러분들이 좀 위로받을 수 있는 순간이 있었으면 좋겠다. 그런 무대를 만들려고 노력해야겠다라는 생각을 했던 것 같습니다.
U.S. President Donald Trump is increasingly pushing other countries to support Washington's effort to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but many of them are hesitant to get involved. And Trump has postponed this summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping citing the Middle East conflict. But speculation is high that it's Trump's tactic to pressure Beijing to join his plan. The South Korean government remains on heightened alert over the unfolding situation in the Middle East, with President Lee Jae-myung calling for preparations for worst-case scenarios related to the conflict. U.S. President Donald Trump has reiterated his request for South Korea and other nations to take part in efforts to secure the Strait of Hormuz, even citing the number of U.S. troops deployed in South Korea and Japan. Our Kim Bo-kyung has our top story this afternoon. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday once again urged countries, including South Korea, to actively help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Speaking to the reporters at the White House, Trump said the U.S. strongly encourages other nations whose economies depend on the strait to help secure the key oil shipping route.
You know, we get less than 1% of our oil from the strait, and some countries get much more. Japan gets 95%. China gets 90%. Many of the Europeans get quite a bit. South Korea gets 35%. So we want them to come and help us with the strait.
Trump has accused allies of showing low enthusiasm for the coalition, which he says would matter to him.
Some are countries that we've helped for many, many years. We've protected them from horrible outside sources. and they weren't that enthusiastic. And the level of enthusiasm matters to me.
Later on at his office, he further pressured South Korea and other countries, saying the U.S. have 45,000 troops stationed each in Japan and South Korea, and between 45,000 and 50,000 in Germany. Though the exact scale of U.S. troop deployments differs from the facts, as there are about 50,000 in Japan, 28,500 in Korea, and around 35,000 in Germany, his remarks are seen as a way to point out how these countries are hesitating in engaging in military cooperation between the U.S. and Iran. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also stressed the importance of global cooperation to ensure security in the Strait of Hormuz, a move seen as laying the groundwork for an official request at the U.S. government level. This during Rubio's phone talks with his South Korean counterpart Cho Hyun on Monday. The talks were held at the request of the U.S., and Rubio, according to the Foreign Ministry, asked for support and interest to bring peace and stability to the region. Earlier, the Blue House had kept a cautious stance regarding this issue during Monday's briefing, saying it needs sufficient deliberation between Seoul and Washington. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And Trump has also asked to postpone his upcoming trip to Beijing, originally scheduled for later this month. However, U.S. officials have dismissed the speculation that the delay is linked to efforts to pressure China over security in the Strait of Hormuz. Oh Soo-young reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he has asked China to delay his planned visit to Beijing by about a month. Speaking at the Oval Office on Monday, Trump said he still wants to travel to China, but feels he needs to remain in the United States while the Middle East conflict continues. White House spokesperson Carolyn Leavitt said earlier in the day that the dates may be moved as Trump prioritizes overseeing the U.S. military operation against Iran. The Beijing trip had been scheduled for March 31st to April 2nd for talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping that had been expected to help stabilize the rocky relations between the world's two largest economies. This comes amid tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, as Iran has threatened to set fire on vessels transiting the vital waterway. Trump has urged several countries, including China, to help protect commercial shipping in the strait, but Beijing has not directly responded. Still, preparations for a potential Trump-Xi summit have continued. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng held 2 days of talks in Paris aimed at preparing possible agreements on rare earth supply chains and expanded Chinese purchases of U.S. farm goods. Wrapping up the talks on Monday, Bessent said if the summit is delayed, it wouldn't be due to war politics, but logistics.
If the president's visit is postponed, it would have nothing to do with the Chinese making a commitment to the Straits of Hormuz. It would obviously be in their interest to do so, but a postponement would not be as a result of any ask from the president not being met. The postponement, if it happens, would be because the commander-in-chief of the United States military believes that he should stay in the United States while this war is being prosecuted.
Beijing said Monday that the two sides remain in contact regarding Trump's visit.
Heads of state diplomacy plays an irreplaceable role in providing strategic guidance for China-U.S. relations. China and the U.S. are in communication regarding President Trump's visit to China.
The spokesperson did not respond directly to questions about Washington's call for assistance in the strait. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
While President Donald Trump continues to push for a coalition against Iran, key U.S. allies, particularly in Europe, remain hesitant to become involved. Lee Seung-ja has the details.
Several key U.S. allies said Monday they have no immediate plans to send naval forces to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz, pushing back against President Donald Trump's request for military support to keep the vital waterway open. Trump had called on partner nations to help police the strategic strait after Iran responded to joint U.S.-Israeli strikes with drones, missiles, and naval mines, effectively shutting down tanker traffic through the narrow channel. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical energy choke points, normally carrying about 1/5 of global oil shipments, as well as large volumes of liquefied natural gas. European leaders signaled clear reluctance to involve NATO in the escalating conflict. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz made it clear on Monday that Germany would not take part in the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran.
Like the United States and Israel, we want to see an end to Iran's nuclear and missile programs, but we will not take part in this war. We have said this from day one. That remains the position of the federal government.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer also rejected suggestions that the military alliance could be used to secure shipping routes through this strait, reinforcing a broader European stance against expanding NATO's role in the crisis.
We will protect our people in the region. Second, while taking the necessary action to defend ourselves and our allies, we will not be drawn into the wider war. And third, we will keep working towards a swift resolution that brings security and stability back to the region.
The pushback comes as tensions grow between Washington and its European allies over how far the alliance should be drawn into the conflict, which has now entered its third week. Shinsegae, Arirang News.
In the meantime, the conflict in the Middle East is entering a dangerous new phase as Israel officially launches a ground invasion into southern Lebanon. Our Chung Hae-rim has the details.
Israel's military says its troops have begun what it calls limited and targeted ground operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. This action marks a major escalation, expanding Israel's campaign beyond Iran to target one of Tehran's key regional allies. The Israel Defense Forces stated that thousands of troops from its 91st Division are now operating against key Hezbollah strongholds. Sweeping evacuation orders have been issued, telling all residents south of the Litani River to leave the area immediately. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned that displaced residents will not be able to return until the threat to northern Israel is fully removed. Meanwhile, the humanitarian toll continues to mount. According to Lebanese authorities, Israeli attacks have killed over 850 people and displaced nearly 1 million residents since the conflict escalated. Israeli officials say the ground operation could last well beyond the current conflict with Iran. The ground offensive follows a massive barrage of rockets and drones fired by Hezbollah into Israel. The Iran-backed group says the attacks were in retaliation for the recent assassination of Iran's supreme leader. Meanwhile, Iran is issuing stern warnings to Washington regarding any direct American military intervention. Speaking in Tehran, Iran's deputy foreign minister strongly cautioned the U.S. against deploying troops.
Look, even suggesting that a foreign country can put boots on the ground of another country, invade another country, occupy the land of another country, is something very much rogue, very reckless, illegal, and against all international law. There is no mandate.
Analysts say the new offensive highlights the growing complexity of the war. Opening another front raises questions about whether Israel can sustain long-term operations across multiple battle zones, especially with largely reservist-based military. With tensions rising and no clear path to de-escalation, concerns are growing that the conflict could evolve into a prolonged regional war. Chung Hae-rim, Arirang News.
And with the war in the Middle East now into its third week, President Lee Jae-myung has urged his officials to prepare for the worst-case scenarios from the prolonged conflict. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jang-min has this report.
Preparing for the worst-case scenarios stemming from a possible prolonged conflict in the Middle East. That was the message from President Lee Jae-myung on Tuesday as he presided over the weekly cabinet meeting at the government complex in Sejong, noting that oil prices have started to stabilize since a price cap was implemented. But he warned of further uncertainties.
중동 상황이 당초 예상을 뛰어넘는 방향으로 확대되고 있습니다. 현재와 같은 양상이라면 잠시 진정됐던 석유 가격이 다시 불안정해지고 민생 전반에 가해질 충격도 커지게 될 것 같습니다.
He called on officials to supervise prices on site to make sure the price cap is actually reflected at the gas pumps, as some cases have been reported where oil refiners and gas stations raised prices despite the new rule.
We will impose strict punishment on any violation of the oil price cap and the false reporting of supply prices.
On top of that, President Lee emphasized the need to find alternative energy supplies.
UAE에서 추가 원유를 확보했던 것처럼 우리의 외교 역량과 자산을 총동원해서 안정적인 추가 대체 공급선 발굴에 총력을 기울여야 되겠습니다.
He mentioned the possibility of temporarily limiting the use of private vehicles and placing export controls on certain items if necessary. He also instructed the cabinet to swiftly organize an extra budget.
전쟁 추경이 신속하게 집행될 수 있도록 다각도로 노력해 주시기 바랍니다. 결국은 소득 지원 정책을 안 할 수가 없을 것 같은데 이번 추경을 한다면 그럴 때도 아주 지방에 더 대대적으로 할 수 있게.
Balancing out development across all regions of the country was also on the agenda, as the meeting took place in the administrative city of Sejong. Additionally, the cabinet approved a bill aimed at implementing U.S. investment worth $350 billion, for which a strategic investment corporation will be established. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
In the meantime, oil prices pulled back, bringing a sense of relief to the markets. Now, that shifted carried into Seoul, with the domestic stocks closing higher and the Korean won also strengthening. Our Kim Jun-hong reports.
South Korea's financial markets showed signs of relief on Tuesday, with the benchmark index posting strong gains despite ongoing uncertainties in the Middle East. The Kospi closed higher at 5,640.48, led by strong gains in large-cap stocks, as buying in semiconductor and auto shares lifted the overall index. The Kosdaq ended slightly lower, but saw an intraday rebound driven by net retail buying. Meanwhile, the Korean won strengthened slightly, closing at 1,493.6 per dollar, down 3.91 from the previous session. The rally appears to have been driven in part by a recent drop in oil prices, which have been a major source of market swings.
Domestic stocks have been moving in line with oil prices. The recent decline in crude, driven by hopes for a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, helped fuel the rebound, with institutional buying and a slowdown in foreign outflows, adding further support.
Wall Street rebounded overnight to finish higher after posting broad losses in the previous session. Major indexes rose, posting gains of roughly 1%. The gains were largely driven by a pullback in oil prices. Brent crude slipped back toward the $100 level on Monday, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude fell more than 5%. The decline came as reports of ships from countries including India and Pakistan passing through the Strait of Hormuz fueled expectations that the route may reopen. Still, analysts say it remains too early to turn optimistic about the situation in the Middle East, with oil prices likely to stay a key driver of market moves for now. Kim Jun-hong, Arirang News.
South Korea's ruling Democratic Party plans to pass key legislation on prosecutorial reform at the upcoming plenary session. DP Chairman Chung Chung-lee announced at a press conference on Tuesday that the ruling bloc had reached a coordinated agreement on bills to establish a new major crime investigation office and a public prosecution office. According to the party leader, the core principle of those bills is a strict separation between investigative and prosecutorial powers, designed to prevent prosecutors from intervening in investigations. The plan would also remove special privileges associated with prosecutors. Now, following a parliamentary subcommittee review, the bill is to be reviewed by the National Assembly's Legislation and Judiciary Committee before being submitted to the plenary session on Thursday. And the DP's party also emphasized that the ruling bloc had fully aligned on the proposal and added that it hopes that the reform would end the controversy over prosecutorial power. Shinsegae Group will build a 250-megawatt AI data center, the largest facility of its kind in South Korea, and the first deal done under U.S. President Donald Trump's AI export program. Now, Shinsegae Chairman Jung Yong-jin and Reflection AI CEO Michelle Laskin signed an MOU in San Francisco on Monday to establish a sovereign AI factory with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in attendance. Now, the facility will utilize NVIDIA GPUs supplied by Reflection AI, which is a startup founded by former Google DeepMind and AlphaGo developers. Shinsegae plans to use the massive infrastructure to drive its eMart 2.0 initiative, integrating AI into retail logistics and commerce. The two companies expect to establish a joint venture within the year to begin construction. NVIDIA's annual developer conference, GTC 2026, has begun in California. CEO Jensen Huang announced that the company's latest AI chips are being produced by Samsung Electronics, and also revealed a new partnership with Hyundai Motor Group to develop autonomous driving technology. Park Jun-han has more.
NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang declared that the inference inflection point has arrived with the rise of AI agents, shifting the focus from training massive models to super responsive near-instant AI interaction at an unprecedented scale. Speaking at the GTC 2026, Huang predicted that soaring demand for AI processors will drive $1 trillion in sales by 2027.
Finally, AI is able to do productive work, and therefore, the inflection point of inference has arrived. AI now has to think. In order to think, it has to inference. AI now has to do. In order to do, it has to inference. AI has to read. In order to do so, it has to inference. It has to reason. It has to inference. Every part of AI, every time it has to think, it has to reason, it has to do.
During his speech, Huang delivered a special shout-out to South Korea's tech giant Samsung Electronics when introducing the company's latest Vera Rubin chip.
I want to thank Samsung, who manufactures the Grok LP30 chip for us, and they're cranking as hard as they can. I really appreciate you guys.
This marks the first public confirmation that Samsung is now producing custom AI silicon for NVIDIA. On the same day, Hyundai Motor Group announced a strategic partnership with NVIDIA to accelerate the development of software-defined vehicles and autonomous driving. The South Korean carmaker will adopt NVIDIA Drive Hyperion for Level 2 advanced driver assistance systems and eventually Level 4 robotaxis. The system processes massive amounts of AI data, combining Hyundai Motor Group's manufacturing capacity with NVIDIA's AI computing power. The partnership focuses on collecting video, language, and behavioral data, improving AI training and performance, applying the technology to real vehicles, and further enhancing data quality. GTC 2026 runs through Thursday, drawing prominent Korean tech leaders, including SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won, who was in attendance. SK hynix showcased its next-generation high-bandwidth memory solutions at the event, where Che indicated to reporters that the company is considering a U.S. ADR listing to broaden its global investor base. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
A trailer for a documentary about mega-hit boy band BTS and the making of their new album has been released on Tuesday. The film, titled BTS The Return, features scenes from the group's world tours and also the process of working on new songs in Los Angeles. In the trailer, the members reflect on their identity and also hint at changes for their upcoming comeback release. The actual documentary film is set to premiere on Netflix on March 27th.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. A total blackout has paralyzed Cuba as the nation's crumbling electrical grid suffered a complete systematic failure. The Cuban Ministry of Energy and Mines on Monday confirmed a complete disconnection of the island's power grid, leaving 11 million people without power. It's the third major island-wide blackout in just 4 months. Cuba has blamed President Donald Trump's recent warning of tariffs on countries that supply oil to Cuba, which has effectively intensified a U.S. energy blockade against the island. President Trump on Monday even suggested the possibility of a friendly takeover, describing Cuba as a, quote, very weakened nation. As well as oil shortages, the Cuban government lacks the hard currency to repair its aging thermoelectric power plants. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy returned to court in Paris on Monday to appeal his conviction for illegal campaign financing involving the Libyan government. Sarkozy is challenging a September ruling that found him guilty of forming what was described as a criminal association to secure funds from the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. This landmark verdict marked the first time a former president of modern France received an actual prison sentence. Although the 71-year-old leader spent 20 days in prison last year, an appeals court ordered his release pending this new trial. 9 other co-defendants, including 3 former ministers, also face re-examination of evidence in hearings scheduled through June. Sarkozy has denied all wrongdoing and called the legal proceedings politically motivated. A federal judge in Boston has blocked the Trump administration from cutting down the U.S. childhood vaccine schedule. Judge Brian E. Murphy issued a temporary injunction on Monday against Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s order to end broad recommendations for several childhood vaccines. The decision pauses the administration's plan to stop universal shots for flu, hepatitis, and meningitis. Judge Murphy said that Kennedy likely violated federal law when he changed the entire vaccine advisory panel. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Formative breakthrough in medical education.
Today started off mostly clear nationwide, but clouds will move in later tonight. Tomorrow will remain mostly cloudy across the country, with air quality staying at bad levels. We'll see spring rain across the country tomorrow. It'll begin in Chungcheongnam-do province and Jeju-do Island from early in the morning, then spread nationwide by late morning. Most of the rain will taper off by the afternoon. Heavier rain is expected along the south coast with up to 30 millimeters lasting into the night. On Jeju, rainfall could exceed 70 millimeters through early Friday morning. Tomorrow, Seoul will begin the day at 6 degrees Celsius, Daejeon at 5 degrees, Busan at 10 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will rise up to 11 degrees, while Daegu, Gwangju, Busan topping out at 13 degrees. After the rain, the skies will turn mostly clear. We'll see typical spring weather with large day-to-night temperature swings continuing for the rest of the week. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have at this hour. A panel discussion's coming up. Stay tuned.
서양 요리는 오직 하나의 주인공을 위한 무대입니다. 완벽하게 계산된 정무라 같죠. 그런데 한식은 밥과 찬이 어우러져 완성되는 한상이 더 중요해요. 마치 자연을 한 폭에 담은 풍경을 같을까요?
요리사인 저도 한국 음식에 대해서 제대로 모르는 거예요.
향이 미쳤다. 저도 맛보고 싶어요. 알면 알수록 과학적이고 하면 할수록 제가 더 빠져드는 거예요.
온다. 엄청 왔다. 같이 여행을 한번 떠나보시죠.
우선 저희 누나가 발레를 하다 보니까 자연스럽게 누나 발레 학원에 따라가서 누나가 하는 모습을 보니까 저도 하고 싶다고 생각이 조금 들어서 발레 음악에 맞춰서 아무 춤이나 추다 보니까 그냥 그 음악에 맞춰서 제가 몸을 움직이는 게 재밌다고 느껴졌었는지 발레를 계속 하고 있더라고요. 나이가 좀 어릴 때 제가 가진 장점이 무엇인지도 모르고 아예 제가 가진 단점도 모를 때 발레를 시작했다 보니까 제일 큰 문제가 이제 평발이었던 것 같아요. 평발이다 보니까 발레를 할 때 쥐가 조금 많이 나는 편이라 그거를 견뎌가면서 춤을 계속 춰야 했던 거 그게 가장 극복하기 힘들었던 것 같고요. 제가 다리가 다른 친구들보다 조금 두껍다고 해서 제 다리를 조금 싫어했었는데 근데 이제 로잔에 갔다 오고 나서 오히려 제 다리에서 나오는 파워풀한 힘이 좋았다고 해주시는 분들도 있다는 걸 느껴가지고 그 두 개가 가장 극복하기도 힘들었고 기억에 남는 것 같아요. 프릭스티 로잔이라는 콩쿨 자체가 학생들 사이에서는 가장 크고 의미 있는 콩쿨이다 보니 제가 그 로잔 영상을 보면서 자라왔기 때문에 그 무대에 서서 제가 춤을 췄다는 것 자체가 엄청 인상 깊었던 것 같아요. 제가 걸어왔던 길, 이게 맞는 방법일까? 근데 그런 의구심을 다 없앨 수 있게 제가 가는 길이 맞았다라는 거를 확인시켜줬던 것 같아요. 그래서 그런 감정이 들어서 조금 감격스러웠던 것 같아요. 한 배역에만 잘 할 수 있는 명수가 아니라 어떠한 배역을 받아도 다 넣어서 소화해낼 수 있는 그런 스펙트럼이 넓은 명수가 되고 싶습니다.
아리랑 아라리요 아리랑 고개로 넘어간다 멈추지 마라 세상 끝까지 가자 아리랑 아리랑 아라리요
U.S. President Donald Trump has slammed some of America's allies for refusing to deploy warships to help escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, saying they have failed to show loyalty despite decades of U.S. security support. We have more in today's Press Perspective. U.S. President Donald Trump continues to pursue a coalition to confront Iran and to ease the energy crisis, renewing calls for nations to help police the Strait of Hormuz. But uncertainty remains over whether those nations will ultimately be drawn into the conflict. For more, we turn to France 24 correspondent Chloe Bourgnon today. Welcome, Chloe.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And also on my left, on my right, is freelance writer David Lee. It's good to have you with us, David.
Hi, Dami. It's great to be here.
So, David, to start with, Trump is now trying to cajole at least 7 nations into deploying naval vessels into the Strait of Hormuz. Now, it looks like the number of nations has been increased from the previously mentioned 5. Could you give us more details on that?
Yeah, sure. So like you said, Trump has asked around 7 countries to deploy naval ships to the Strait of Hormuz to help the U.S. open back up the waterway. And while he hasn't specified the countries, we know from reports that he previously asked China, France, Britain, Japan, and South Korea for assistance. So those are the 5 countries that we know of as of now. And in addition to these ships, he may also want some of their minesweepers or destroyers to help escort the commercial vessels that are either stuck or can't have access to the waterway. And he's wanting help, like I said, opening back up the waterway, which is very crucial as it's responsible for 20%, roughly 20% of the world's oil transit. So 20% of the oil travels through that waterway one way or another.
Right.
And Iran has said it has closed the waterway for its quote-unquote enemies. So in this case, including the U.S. and maybe some of its allies. And it has threatened enemy ships with its drones and mines. These ships, they can't really go into the waterway because of these threats. And it's obviously, we've seen through the news how catastrophic it has been for the energy and trade flows. The news reports have suggested that this is the largest oil supply disruption in history. Just to give you an idea, the International Energy Agency said that millions of barrels of crude oil each day are restricted from traveling in the waterway. And oil prices soared over $100 this past week, $100 per barrel these past few weeks. And it was just at $60 per barrel at the end of 2025. So the reason for Trump asking his allies, for the reason for his outreach, we think that it's because due to the financial burden that the U.S. has due to the war on Iran. $11.3 billion was just used in the first 6 days of the war from the U.S. And also, it also has to do with the size of the strait and just the scale that would be required for an operation to take back, quote-unquote, control of the waterway.
Right.
It's just, the scale is just very massive, so it would also be a very big burden on the U.S. and on Trump's administration. And also, the U.S. polls show that there's growing dissent towards the war.
Right.
So, these are all factors that play into Trump wanting a more multi-party kind of coalition acting on, the efforts in the Middle East and especially near Iran.
Right, that is why Trump is more ambitious than ever to get more countries involved in the war against Iran. Now, the thing is, though, Chloe, U.S. allies have been either non-committal or have, outright rejected involvement in the war. What are some of the countries' reactions so far, starting with France?
Yeah, so France, the UK, Japan, for example, have been some of the countries that have been publicly named by Donald Trump in his social media posts. So. If we take France and the UK, for example, their position, both of them are very clear. They are not taking part militarily in the conflict for now. So France is a bit interesting because before the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, has said on the 3rd of March, and then when he visited Cyprus as well, in discourses, he said that he was ready to defend French economical interests. He was ready to make a coalition. He was even ready to have military means to secure maritime traffic back into the Strait of Hormuz. But now what we see, the most recent information we have, is that France want only a defensive position on the Strait of Hormuz. So we have about a dozen of military ships now located in the Mediterranean Sea. But the Defense Ministry of France has said on last Thursday, that they were only there on a defensive posture. It's a bit of the same thing with the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has announced that the UK is discussing to see if there can be a coalition. But what they say is they want to move on in their on terms after discussing the most viable ways to do it with the allies rather than being dragged into a war. And also the UK Minister of Energy has also said that for him at this stage the only solution would be de-escalation of the conflict between Iran and the US. So kind of saying the war should stop before anyone can discuss anything about the Strait of Hormuz. And as for Japan, what they have said for now is a bit similar. They're saying that there's no plan to dispatch any boats, even to secure even the passage. And they want to think about it independently. So that's a bit of the same position than the European and UK allies. And we've seen Trump's reaction. Donald Trump has been quite bitter about the lack of commitment of his allies. So we have to see how much pressure he's able to put on them in the coming days.
So it's clear that key U.S. allies, namely UK, France, and where else? Germany, they appear to be not too fond of joining the war at the moment. But China is also reportedly included in the 7-member list, David. But it's not a U.S. ally, right? But Trump later also put his summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping on hold. Now, some say that it's Trump's tactic to pressure China to, join in deploying naval vessels to the Hormuz. Is it safe to say that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the media is kind of framing it as. According to a report from the Financial Times, Trump said that, as you mentioned, he may delay the China summit. And I think just the timing is, kind of suspicious, kind of. And he was quoted saying that I think China should help because China gets 90% of its oil from the Straits. That was kind of his reasoning. While the number is, I think, closer to 45%. Either way, he is really expecting assistance from Beijing before the U.S.-China summit at the end of the month. Yeah, but the U.S. doesn't really want this narrative to go out, I think. So U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he was, I think yesterday, he was quoted saying that the rescheduling, if we do reschedule, in fact, would be due to logistics. But this summit is really a crucial meeting between the leaders of the U.S. and China.
Of course.
And like you said, it's very sort of perplexing for the U.S. to request this to a country that has traditionally been having friendly relations with Iran. China is one of Iran's most important strategic partners, and it's the biggest purchaser of its oil, in fact. But I think just kind of guessing their response, China's response, I think China has much more leeway than other countries in Asia, like Japan or South Korea, because China is in a better position for such prolonged energy crisis. For instance, they have stockpiled crude oil reserves for years, and they have invested billions in alternative energy like solar, wind, and electric vehicles. And CNN reports that Iran is also considering allowing tankers through the Strait of Hormuz if the oil is traded in Chinese yuan. So, this, I think, indicates that maybe Chinese ships will be able to travel in the waterway soon. But there's also another side. China has also criticized Iran's strikes against its neighbors, including Saudi Arabia. And this is because China has invested heavily in the region, in the Middle East region, and it's really interested in the stability of the region for interests back home. So, yeah, this is kind of China will have to do a balancing act in this case.
Well, one thing's for sure, we'll have to wait at least one more month for the two leaders to meet in person for now, David. Now, Chloe, given the complexity of this issue, South Korea finds itself in a very difficult position. Maybe that's why it's been taking a rather, cautious approach, hasn't it?
Yes, definitely. The position is like precaution before everything. We know that this weekend on Sunday, the presidential office, the Blue House office, has said that they were carefully deliberating its response to Trump's request, because again, South Korea was also one of the publicly named countries that were asked to participate by Donald Trump. On Sunday, it's interesting to see also that the People Power Party floor leader of the National Assembly reminded that sending a float or any kind of military ship to Hormuz would have to be done with the agreement from the parliament, as it is said in the constitution. Kind of reminding that it would be kind of involving the country, might involve the country into a war. And that's an uncomfortable position. When you look at the local national medias here, everyone has been saying that it's kind of hard for South Korea to find a correct answer, because the United States are obviously a close, if not the closest ally on security matters. We know that the two countries are even currently doing some common exercises. And also there's a need for oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz for South Korea as well. So South Korea is, as most of the countries, waiting for the strait to open again.
Exactly.
But on the other side, the risk of participation is kind of heavy, because there's a risk of being military engaged in the area, and also there's a potential diplomatic imbalance. So for now, in the relationships, for now, South Korea has been building up a strong relationship, diplomatic relationship in the area with all of the countries, because it's part of the plan to get a good energetic security, so important assets in the region. And also there's a big markets for construction and for South Korean firms to come in those markets. So it's important for South Korea to be very careful when deciding if they should join or not the United States call for help. And that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Right. South Korea is contemplating just as much as the key U.S. allies and also China, as you mentioned, David. Now at the same time, Japan is also facing a very difficult position as it prepares for a summit between President Trump and also Prime Minister Takaichi on the 19th of March. Now, that's also tricky for Japan, right? What are the reactions coming out of Tokyo at the moment?
Yeah, kind of similar to South Korea. Prime Minister Takaichi, she has said that currently there are no plans to send ships to the waterway. And she previously told the parliament that they're currently examining what Japan can do independently within its legal framework. And the reason she said this is that the country's pacifist constitution limits military engagement in such instances of warfare. But on the other hand, the Strait of Hormuz is very crucial for Japan's energy security. Japan imports 90% of its oil from the Middle East region, of which 70% comes from the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
And also, I think the upcoming summit between Takaichi and Trump on Thursday, I think it's also crucial for Japan's decision-making, because at the moment, Japan's disputes with China is a top priority for Takaichi's administration. They want to sort that out. So as Trump is also set to meet Xi Jinping at the end of this month for their summit, it will be important for Takaichi to persuade Trump to alleviate the relations between Japan and China, help in those relations. And also, U.S.-Japan defense alliances is a top priority at the moment for Japan, with everything going on in the world. But I think a lot of the parliamentary members of Japan, they keep saying that currently the situation at the Strait of Hormuz is not a quote-unquote survival-threatening situation. Doesn't really call for such action from Japan, but at the same time, I think its government is still keeping its door open for possible future actions if needed in the future. And I think the Japan Times, they reported that an option, if that was the case, an option would be to dispatch self-defense forces to protect Japan's commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. And I think there's this idea is being passed around because in the past, former Prime Minister Shinsegae Abe, he previously said that such a blockade with mines, which Iran is doing currently, would qualify as survival-threatening situation. Obviously, he's not the Prime Minister at the moment, but there are differing opinions. But again, like in South Korea, it's a fragile situation, and there's a risk of Takaichi receiving mass opposition at home for being involved in such delicate matter. So it's just a fragile situation at the moment.
Well, we are already in the third week of the war between U.S., Israel, and Iran. And it looks like the countries around the world, key U.S. allies, are not too comfortable in joining the war at the moment, to recap. But Chloe, what are some of the analyses that are emerging about the feasibility of Trump's possible proposed naval coalition?
So I would say, when looking broadly at the international press, it's kind of pessimistic view. Most of the experts are not very confident in this plan working out smoothly. If we look, for example, also in one of the Al Jazeera articles, they had an interesting maritime expert who was speaking about the probably main problem, which is the problem of interoperability, which is marines from different countries have different ways of working, they have different way of communicating, obviously different strategies and everything. This is why when you're close allies, you'll usually do work like military exercises together, as the US and Korea would be doing, or in Europe, most of the European countries are also working quite often together to kind of prepare the fact of working together on a wartime engagement. So they're saying that that could be one of the problems. The other thing is, I've been touching on it before, but the risk of being involved in the conflict. It's not only going into the Strait of Hormuz hoping to help the ships go through. There is a risk of mine, there is possible torpedoes that could destroy some of the ships, and so that could escalate the conflict. And then also some countries have been negotiating for secure passage for their petroleum shipments, because as you were saying at the beginning, Iranian regime has been saying that they are only cutting the way for their enemies, and that would be US and their allies. So some countries might be trying to get through a diplomatic way as well.
Well, Trump has been insisting that the naval coalition is to help reopen the Hormuz and also help escort oil tankers. But the thing is, David, some experts say, or some reports say, that Trump's real objective may be actually to control the Strait of Hormuz. What would the implications of that be?
Yeah, I think people may, lean towards that way of thinking towards Trump because he has previously stated that he's thinking about taking over the Strait.
Right.
And he and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has repeatedly pledged using their Navy military assets to escort its oil tankers in the waterway. So. But, again, if you think about it, it's a very tricky situation for the U.S. And we really have to think about what he really meant, what Trump really meant when he said that, because to take, quote-unquote, control of the waterway, you would need a mix of water, air, and ground troops to target Iranian missiles and drones and to seize territory around the Strait of Hormuz, according to military experts. And the Wall Street Journal estimates that thousands of soldiers and sailors would be needed for months for such operations, such big-scale operations. And another factor is that the U.S. cannot legally occupy the waterway. It would be a violation of sovereignty towards Iran and Oman. So there's also that, but security experts also are suggesting that no single country can fully control the strait, like we said, due to the size and the volume of ships that travel through the waterway every day. So I think a more realistic goal of the U.S. and maybe Trump meant that he wanted to deter Iran from closing the waterway, from reassuring the oil markets, as his economy is hit heavily by today's situation. He would also want to pressure allies to join the coalition, as we've been talking about, and to show that the U.S. military is determined and ready to act if needed. So maybe that's kind of the message he's been trying to send. And another thing that we need to keep in mind is that is the situation at home, the politics at home, with the midterm elections coming in November. While it's some time apart away, I think Trump is still really mindful of it, and that with the dissent building up at home, away from the war, I think maybe Trump would have to rethink his decision twice.
Right. Well, it looks like Trump will continue to persuade key allies to join and deploy naval vessels, but the attention will be on whether, how countries will actually respond, individually or in coordinated joint action, because the strain on the global economy is also, increasingly evident.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, David, for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And also, Chloe, it was nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
And that wraps up our discussion for the day. This has been Kim Dami. Thank you for watching.